Hello 5H, Miss Everatt back again to do some more reading for you guys. I thought I'd do a bit of a cosy theme this time. So I've gathered some nice cushions, I've got a blanket on my knees, got a nice cosy light to create the ambience. I've got a cup of tea. I've also got a candle. So it makes a really relaxing crackling noise as it burns as well. And I got my onesie on, of course. So yeah, last time in Clockwork by Philip Pullman, we got up to the point where Fritz, the story writer, was just about to start reading his new spooky story to the whole tavern. And he was nervous because he hadn't actually quite finished it yet. Also, I've got my nice stars and moons here. Hope you like them. So, let's get started. Fritz's story. I wonder if any of you remember the extraordinary business at the palace a few years ago. They tried to hush it up, but some details came out. Bizarre mystery it was too. It seemed that Prince Otto had taken his young son, Florian, hunting, together with an old friend of the royal family, Baron Stelgraff. They'd set off in a sledge for the hunting lodge up in the mountains, well wrapped up against the cold, and they weren't expected back for a week or so. Well, what should happen but that only 2 nights later, the sentry on duty at the palace gate saw a commotion down the road and heard the whinnying of horses, whinnying in panic, making a terrible racket, and it looked, though he couldn't be sure, as if the sledge was being driven towards the palace by a madman. The sentry raised the alarm and called for the lights, and when their sledge got close enough, they could see it was the royal sledge, the very one the prince had set off in only 2 nights before. It was hurtling down the road behind those terrified horses, and it wasn't going to stop. And the sergeant on guard gave orders to drag the palace gates open quickly before it crashed. They got them up open just in time. The sledge rushed through and then drove round and round the courtyard, for the horses were mad with fear and couldn't stop. The poor beasts were covered with foam, and their eyes were rolling, and the sledge would be going round the courtyard still if one of the runners hadn't caught on a mountain block and turned the whole thing over. Out fell the driver, and out fell a bundle from the back of the sledge. A servant hastened to pick it up and found little Prince Florian, wrapped in a fur rug, safe and warm, and half asleep. But as for the driver, well, as soon as the sentries came close, they saw who it was. It was none other than Prince Otto himself, stark dead, as cold as ice, with his eyes wide and staring ahead of him. His left hand gripping the reins so tight that it had to be cut loose, and, this was the strangest part, his right hand still moving, lashing the whip up and down, up and down, up and down. They covered him up so the princess wouldn't see him, and took little Prince Florian to her to prove he was alive and well, because he was their only child. But what was to be done with Prince Otto? They took his body into the palace and sent for the royal physician, a worthy old man who'd studied in Heidelberg and Paris and Bologna, and who'd published on the location of the soul. He studied geology and hydrology and physiology. A dead body that wouldn't keep still. Imagine that! Stretched out icy cold on a marble slab with its right arm lashing and lashing and lashing, with no sign that it was ever going to stop. The physician locked the door to keep the servants out and brought the lamp closer, and bent low to look. And then his eye was caught by something in the clumsy arrangement of the clothes. So, avoiding that lashing right arm, he carefully unfastened the cloak, and the fur coat, and the underjacket, and the shirt, and laid the prince's chest bare. There it was, a gash across his breast just over the heart, crudely sewn up with a dozen stitches. The physician got his scissors and snipped them away, and then he nearly fainted with surprise. because when he opened the wound, there was no heart there. Instead, there was a little piece of clockwork, just a few cogs and springs and a balanced wheel, attached in subtle ways to the prince's veins, and a tick-tick ticking away merrily, in perfect time with the lashing of the arm. Well, you can imagine how the physician crossed himself and took a sip of brandy to calm his nerves. Who wouldn't? Then he carefully cut the attachments and lifted out the clockwork, and as he did so, the arm fell still, just like that. As he got to that point in his story, Fritz paused for a sip of beer and to see how his audience was taking it. The silence in the inn was profound. Every single customer was sitting so still they might have been dead themselves, except for their wide eyes and expressions of tense excitement. He had never had such a success. He turned the page and read on. Fritz's story continued. Well, the physician sewed up Prince Otto's wound and let it be known that the prince had died of apoplexy. The servants who carried the body in thought differently. They knew a dead man when they saw one, even if his arm was moving. At any rate, the official version was that Prince Otto had suffered a contusion of the brain, and that his love for his son had kept him alive just long enough to drive him safely home. He was buried with a good deal of ceremony, and everyone was in mourning for 6 months. As for what happened to Baron Stelgratz, the other member of the hunting party, no one could guess. The whole affair was shrouded in mystery. But the royal physician had an idea. There was one man who might be able to explain what had happened, Dr. Calmenius of Schatchberg, of whom very few people had heard, but those who did know of him said he was the cleverest man in Europe. For making clockwork, he had no equal, not even our good Herr Ringelmann. He could make intricate pieces of calculating apparatus that worked out the position of the stars and the planets and answer any mathematical question. Dr. Calmenius could have made his fortune if he wanted to, but he wasn't interested in fortune or fame. He was interested in something far deeper than that. He could spend hours sitting in graveyards, contemplating the mysteries of life and death. Some said he had experimented on dead bodies. Others said he was in a league with the powers of darkness. No one knew for certain. But one thing they did know was that he used to walk about at night, pulling behind him a little sledge, containing whatever secret matter he was working on at that time. What did he look like, this philosopher of the night? He was very tall and thin, with a prominent nose and jaw. His eyes blazed like coals in caverns of darkness. His hair was long and grey, and he wore a black cloak with a loose hood like that of a monk. He had a harsh, grating voice, and his expression was full of savage curiosity. There's another one of these little information boxes on this page, and it says, there was a lot of argument about the location of the soul in those days. Some philosophers thought it was located in the brain, some in the heart, some pineal gland, whatever that is. They even used to weigh people before and after they died to see whether they weighed less when the soul had left them. I don't know whether they did or not. Okay, and on the next page there's also an information box and a big illustration, so I'll show you that. Can you see? It's a little scene of some people. You got somebody playing a piano, somebody doing some archery with a bow and arrow, somebody playing a woodwind instrument, looks like a flute, somebody playing a board game, and it looks like a couple of people singing. So it says, there was something uncanny about Dr. Calmenius's clockwork. He made little figures that sang and spoke and played chess, and shot tiny arrows from tiny bows, and played the harpsichord as well as Mozart. You can see some of his clockwork figures today in the museum at Schatberg. but they don't work anymore. It's odd because all the parts are in place and in perfect order, and they should work, but they don't. It's almost as if they had died. So I guess that image is actually his figures that he made. Okay, so next part of the book. And that was the man who... Fritz stopped. He swallowed, and his eyes moved to the door. Everyone followed. The parlour had never been so still. No one moved. No one dared to breathe, for the latch was lifting. The door slowly opened. On the threshold stood a man in a long black cloak, with a loose hood like a monk's. His grey hair hung down on either side of his face, a long narrow face with a prominent nose and jaw, and eyes that looked like burning coals in caverns of darkness. Oh, the silence as he stepped inside. Every single person in the parlour was gaping, mouth open, eyes wide, and when they saw what the stranger was pulling behind him, a little sledge with something wrapped in canvas, more than one crossed themselves and stood up in fear. The stranger bowed. "Dr. Calmenius of Scatsburg, at your service," he said, in a harsh, grating voice. "I have come a long way tonight, and I'm cold. A glass of brandy." The landlord poured it hastily. The stranger drained it at once and held out the glass for more. Still nobody moved. "So silent," said Dr. Calmenius, looking around mockingly. "One might think one had arrived among the dead." The burgomaster swallowed hard and got to his feet. "I beg your pardon, Dr. Calmenius, but the fact is that..." And he looked at Fritz, who was staring at Dr. Calmenius with horror. The young man was as pale as the paper in his hand. His eyes were nearly starting from his head. His hair was standing on end, and a ghastly sweat had broken out on his forehead. "Yes, my good sir," said Dr. Calmenius. I... and swallowed convulsively. The burgomaster intervened. "The fact is, our young friend is a writer of stories, Doctor, and he was reading us one of his tales when you arrived." "Ah, how delightful," said Dr. Calmenius. "I should greatly enjoy hearing the rest of your story, young sir. Please don't feel inhibited by my presence. Carry on as if I weren't here at all." A little cry broke from Fritz's throat. With a sudden movement, he crumpled up all his sheets of paper together and thrust them into the stove, where they blazed up high. "I beg you," he cried, "have nothing to do with this man." And like someone who has seen the devil, he ran out of the inn as fast as he could. Dr. Calmenius broke into a wild and mocking laugh, and at that several other good citizens followed Fritz's example and left their pipes and their mugs of beer, grabbed their coats and hats, and were off, not even daring to look at the stranger in the eye. Herr Ringelmann and the burgomaster were almost the last to leave. The old clockmaker thought he should say something to a fellow craftsman, but his tongue was mute. And the burgomaster thought he should either welcome the eminent Dr. Calmenius or send him on his way, but his nerve failed, and the two old men took their sticks and hurried away as fast as they could. Little Gretel was clinging to her father, the landlord, watching it all with wide eyes. "Well," said Dr. Calmenius, "you keep early hours in this town. I will take another glass of brandy." The landlord poured with a shaking hand and ushered Gretel out, for this was no company for a child. Dr. Calmenius drained the brandy at once and called for yet another. "And perhaps this gentleman will join me," he said, turning to the corner of the bar. For there sat Karl still. In the rush of all the other customers to leave, he had not moved. He turned his glowering face, now flushed with drink and sullen with self-hatred, to glare at the stranger. But he could not meet those mocking eyes, and he dropped his gaze to the floor. "Bring a glass for my companion," said Dr. Calmenius to the landlord, "and then you may leave us." The landlord put the bottle and another glass on the bar and fled. Only 5 minutes before, the parlour had been full to bursting, but now Dr. Calmenius and Karl were alone, and the inn was so quiet that Carl could hear the whispers of flames in the stove and the ticking of the old clock in the corner, even over the beating of his own heart. Dr. Calmenius poured some brandy and pushed a glass along the bar. Carl said nothing. Okay, we'll leave it there for today then. Mysterious, what's going to happen next? So I just want to say also thank you to everyone who's been sending emails in, sending photos in, videos. I've been looking at them all and they've been making me smile so much. And I know it's the same for Mrs. Mills. They really make our day. It's just so nice to know what you're getting up to and to see your smiling faces as well. So keep it coming. And I hope you're all taking care as well, being safe, keeping busy, keeping your mind busy and your body busy. We'll be on here again soon, I'm sure. So I'll speak to you soon.